Sometimes what disturbs us and others is not what is wrong. Sometimes it is what we have exiled within ourselves. If life could be described with a metaphor, I would imagine it going something like this. Imagine that you are enormous, not physically, but psychologically. Imagine that you are a creature so vast that you could never fully see yourself, something ancient and impossibly large. Now, imagine you are only given one tiny mirror, and that tiny mirror only reflects a small piece of you. And in the reflection of that mirror, we mistake that is what we fully look like. That is what being a human being feels like to me. We spend our whole lives trying to understand ourselves, while only being able to see fragments of it. A thought here, an emotion there, a reaction, a memory, a fear, a dream, but never the whole thing. And then something interesting happens. People enter our lives, and every person arrives carrying another mirror. Each one reflects a different angle of ourselves back to us, a different piece, a different part of ourselves we couldn't see alone. Some mirrors feel warm, some feel exciting, some feel deeply comfortable, and some mirrors we absolutely cannot stand. Someone says something completely ordinary, and suddenly we feel offended, embarrassed, defensive, angry, or strangely emotional. And often our instinct is to think, why are they like that? Why would they say that? Why are they making me feel this way? But what if, before asking what is wrong with the mirror, we become curious about what it is showing? Not because every reaction means trauma, not because every conflict means we are wrong, but because sometimes discomfort contains information. Sometimes it reveals a fear, a value, an old wound, an unmet need, or simply a part of ourselves we haven't understood yet. I think this is why self-awareness can feel so difficult, because we don't discover ourselves in isolation. We discover ourselves through contact, through friction, through being seen, through relationships. Someone ignores us and we discover our fear of rejection. Someone criticizes us and we discover our relationship with worth. Someone leaves and we discover attachment. Someone deeply loves us and we discover how receiving can sometimes be difficult. Life keeps introducing us to ourselves. And if all people are mirrors, then romantic relationships might be the biggest mirrors of them all. Because partners often reflect back to us the parts that nobody else reaches. They don't just see our personality, they meet our patterns, our fears, our expectations, our habits, our unconscious beliefs. And that can feel beautiful, but it can also feel unbearable. Because sometimes the parts reflected back to us are exactly the parts we don't want to see. And perhaps that is why relationships can feel so confusing. We fall in love with someone because something about them feels familiar. Then months or years later, that very thing can become the source of our frustration. What once felt magnetic suddenly feels irritating. What once felt exciting now feels exhausting. And perhaps the question isn't, why did I choose the wrong person? Perhaps the question is, what is this relationship trying to teach me about myself? For instance, for a quality that we have that is perceived purely as strength in our culture, until life puts us beside someone who challenges it. For example, take someone who never gets angry. They may think, I'm calm, I'm peaceful, I don't have any anger issues. But perhaps they are not truly at peace. Maybe they simply never felt safe expressing anger as children. Maybe they learned anger was dangerous. Such as expressing anger once led to punishment, rejection, conflict, and fear. So instead of expressing anger in a healthy way, they have learned to suppress it entirely. Then later in life, they meet someone who is fiery, expressive, or emotionally reactive. And suddenly, that person feels deeply confronting. Not only because the outburst feels distressing in the moment, but because unconsciously they awaken something that was long buried within, the anger they never allowed themselves to feel. Sometimes, they may even feel strangely drawn to people like this, partly frightened by them, partly fascinated by them. And often, they may try to fix the other person's anger, not simply because they want peace for them, but because themselves do not yet feel safe around anger at all. Because when they were children, anger may have felt dangerous. So seeing it expressed outwardly can feel overwhelming. And in that way, what disturbs us and others is not always wrong. Sometimes it is what we have exiled within ourselves. Or take someone who is extremely responsible with money. They may be disciplined, careful, and organized. Then they fall in love with someone spontaneous. They feel relaxed around spending, and it creates an unusual amount of stress within them. At first, they may think, my partner is irresponsible. My partner is the problem. But sometimes the intensity of our reaction reveals something deeper. Perhaps their relationship with money was never only about wisdom. Perhaps underneath the control is fear. Fear of instability, fear of chaos, fear of being unstable again. Maybe they grew up in households where money created anxiety, conflict, and unpredictability. So now their partner's spending doesn't only feel inconvenient, it unconsciously reactivates the feelings of danger. And if they only focus on changing the other person, they may never notice the deeper fear underneath their own distress. Because relationships do not only reveal our own preferences, sometimes they reveal the emotional roots beneath our strengths. So the question for someone who is extremely responsible with money could look like this. What if my relationship with money isn't only wisdom? What if part of it is fear? What if underneath control there is fear of instability? Again, not because spending is good, not because saving is bad, but because relationships sometimes exposes the emotional roots of our strengths. The fascinating thing in life is that it often seems to bring us the same lessons, but in different clothing, different face, different name, different relationship. Yet somehow the emotional pattern feels strangely familiar. And perhaps that is why some people find themselves asking, why does this keep happening to me? Maybe life is not repeating itself because it wants to punish us. Maybe it's repeating itself because there is still something it wants us to see. I think this is one reason why we become so fixated in wanting to change other people. Because changing the mirror feels easier than looking into it. But if we only fight the reflection, we might miss what it came to reveal. And I want to say something important here. This does not mean tolerating harmful behavior. This does not mean staying in unhealthy relationships. And this does not mean that everything is about us. Sometimes people hurt us because of their own wounds. Sometimes behavior simply needs boundaries. But even then, we can still ask, what is this experience teaching me? What is this showing me about myself? What am I learning about what I need? What am I learning about what I value? Maybe that's one of the hidden gifts of being a human. Not that every experience is pleasant, but that every experience contains information. Every friendship, every heartache, every conflict, every strange emotional reaction, another mirror, another angle, another chance to understand ourselves more deeply. So my challenge for you is when the next time you meet someone, especially the ones who triggers emotional discomfort or friction, try asking a different question. Not, why are they like this? But, what part of myself becomes visible around them? Because growth isn't becoming someone else. Until one day you realize you were never small, you were always vast. You were always more than the tiny reflection you started out with. And perhaps freedom isn't about controlling the vast animal that is you, or finding perfect people. Perhaps freedom is seeing yourself clearly enough that you no longer have to run away from what you find. And you do that one reflection at a time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And I'd love to know what relationship in your life that reflected something back to you that changed you.